The night was cold, the kind of cold that didn't let up until you felt it deep in your bones. Damien Cross, Assistant District Attorney, sat in the driver's seat of his car, the city lights blurring in the rearview mirror as he drove home from a quiet dinner with colleagues. His mind was still buzzing with the conversation, analyzing the cases, the nuances, the thin lines between justice and power. He was focused. He was sharp. He had to be. The hum of the engine filled the car, and for a moment he allowed himself to relax. The stress of the day had melted away, replaced with the peaceful solitude of his late-night drive. But then the lights flashed. Damien's heart skipped a beat. He glanced in the mirror, the familiar blue and red lights of a police cruiser strobing behind him. He didn't even need to pull over. He knew exactly why they were stopping him. It was always the same. A broken taillight. He could see it now. That's what they'd say. He sighed. The routine had gotten old. The same false pretense. The same game they played every time. He slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road, his fingers tightening on the wheel. The officers behind him were in no rush. They weren't worried. They'd seen it all before. Damien was ready for this. He'd dealt with it before. He knew his rights. He wouldn't play their game. The officer stepped out of the cruiser. Officer Cameron Drake. Tall, broad-shouldered. He had the kind of face that seemed permanent, like someone who had been here forever. He walked over to Damien's window with that deliberate stride, the one that told you he was in control, that he didn't fear you, no matter who you were. "Evening, sir." "License and registration," Drake said, his tone practiced and professional. He didn't even glance at Damien's face. Just the words. The script. Damien didn't respond immediately. He didn't want to give them anything. Not yet. "Is there a problem, officer?" Damien finally asked, his voice calm, controlled. "We pulled you over because your taillight is out," Drake said, not even bothering to check if that was true. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Damien felt the familiar tension building, but he kept his face neutral. He glanced down at the dashboard. The taillight? He knew it was working. He could have sworn it was. But it didn't matter. They didn't care about that. "I'm sorry, officer," Damien said, his voice level, "but I'm not stepping out of the vehicle. I haven't done anything wrong, and you have no legal reason to ask me to exit the car." Drake's jaw tightened, just a fraction of an inch. But it was enough. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not like this. He looked over his shoulder at Officer Vincent Malloy, who had just gotten out of the cruiser and was standing by watching. "Sir," Drake said, his voice turning cold, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Step out of the vehicle." Damien didn't move. He kept his hands on the wheel, the pressure of the situation pushing down on him like a weight. "No," Damien replied, his tone unwavering. "I'm within my rights." A silence stretched between them, thick with the kind of tension that comes before things spiral out of control. Damien's pulse was steady, his mind racing, thinking of the best way to handle this. He was in control. He knew the law. He wasn't going to let them manipulate him into something he wasn't. And then, without warning, Drake's hand shot out. "Get out of the car," he barked, grabbing at Damien's door handle. Damien flinched, instinctively jerking back. "No, I'm not getting out of the car." The door opened with a violent jerk. Drake yanked it wide. The air seemed to snap with the force of his movement. Malloy was already at the other side, his hand on the door, pushing it further open. Damien's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the walls closing in. "This is unlawful," Damien shouted, his voice rising. "You can't just pull me out." But Drake wasn't listening. He had his hands on Damien's arm now, yanking him. "Step out now, or I'll arrest you." Damien's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. Not like this. He had worked too hard to get where he was. He was the law. He was a prosecutor. They didn't get to do this to him. "No," Damien said, his voice a low growl now. "You don't have the right." Before he could finish, Drake shoved him, his body crashing against the side of the car. Malloy grabbed Damien's other arm, pulling him out of the vehicle with brute force. The suddenness of it all knocked the air out of him. He struggled, his body twisting, but the officers had him. There were too many of them. "Resisting arrest," Drake muttered, almost to himself. "That's another charge." Damien's vision blurred, his thoughts spinning as they forced him to the ground, pressing his face against the cold pavement. The roughness of it shocked him. This wasn't just a stop. This was a violation. They cuffed him, tight and unforgiving. Every breath felt like a struggle. He fought against the hands holding him down, but it was futile. They had him. Damien didn't give in. He didn't beg. He stayed silent, the only sound the pounding of his heart in his ears. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. He was a prosecutor. He would not let this slide. The courthouse was eerily quiet when Damien was brought in the next morning. His hands were still cuffed, though the charges against him were nothing more than a tangled mess of lies. Resisting arrest. Disorderly conduct. Both fabricated. Both false. Judge Elena Thornton sat at the bench, her face a mask of cold disinterest. She was known for her bias, for her quick rulings that favored law enforcement. It was a game she played, one that always ended the same way. Damien stood in front of her, flanked by his public defender, Oscar Ramirez. Ramirez was already shaking his head, his face drawn tight with frustration. He knew the odds. He had seen Judge Thornton's track record. There was little chance of a fair trial here. Samuel Mitchell, the prosecutor, was confident. He stood tall, his smooth arrogance on full display as he prepared to paint Damien as the aggressor. The officers, Drake and Malloy, stood at attention behind him, ready to tell their version of the events. "This is an open and shut case," Mitchell said, his voice oozing with certainty. The defendant was aggressive, combative, and refused to comply with lawful orders. The officers had no choice but to arrest him. Damien clenched his fists. He could feel the lie hanging in the air like smoke. The truth didn't matter here. It was all about who controlled the narrative. The trial proceeded quickly, the lies from the officers flowing seamlessly into the story Mitchell had crafted. Damien was painted as a man who had overreacted, who had escalated the situation, who had been dangerous and defiant. Oscar Ramirez tried to fight back, but his voice was lost in the tide of corruption. It didn't matter. The fix was in. The courtroom wasn't a place of justice. It was a place for the powerful to protect their own. But then, it was Damien's turn to speak. He took the stand, his gaze steady, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just defending himself. He was about to expose everything. "Mr. Cross," Mitchell said, his tone dripping with condescension, "would you say you complied with the officer's instructions during your traffic stop?" Damien met his gaze, his voice calm, controlled. "I asked why I was being asked to step out of the vehicle. That's not illegal." Mitchell's smirk faltered, just for a second. He turned to the jury, eyes flashing. "But after being ordered multiple times, you refused to comply." "Because there was no lawful reason to do so," Damien replied, his voice unwavering. The room seemed to still, every person in the courtroom hanging on the words, waiting for the next move. And then, with a slight shift in posture, Damien reached into his briefcase. Ramirez stiffened, his hand going to his chest, unsure of what was coming. Damien pulled out his badge. The simple rectangle gleamed under the courtroom lights. "I'm Damien Cross," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Assistant District Attorney for the state." A stunned silence followed. Everyone froze. The officers looked like they'd been struck. Drake's face turned white. Malloy's hands shook. Mitchell's smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of disbelief. The judge, Elena Thornton, looked up, her lips parting slightly. She was a woman of few surprises, but this was something else. Damien let the weight of the revelation settle in. "Did I stutter?" he asked, tilting his head. His voice was steady, but the room felt like it was about to implode. The realization hit. The officers, the prosecutor, even the judge, all of them now knew they were the ones under scrutiny. They were the ones who had to explain themselves. The case was falling apart. Fast. "Your Honor," Damien said, his voice rising above the whispers, "I request that the court pull the dispatch call logs from the night of my arrest." Mitchell sputtered. Drake and Malloy stiffened. The judge's grip on her gavel tightened, but she didn't move. She didn't know what to do. The courtroom held its breath. And in that moment, Damien knew. This wasn't just about him anymore. The floodgates were open, and everything was about to change. But would the truth come to light in time? Would the system hold? The gavel hung in the air, just waiting to fall. The room froze. Damien Cross's words still hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm Damien Cross, Assistant District Attorney for the state." The shock rippled through the courtroom, the silence almost unbearable. It was as if time itself had stopped. Judge Elena Thornton's gavel was raised, but she hesitated, her grip tight as if trying to regain control of a situation that had suddenly spiraled out of her reach. She glanced at Samuel Mitchell, the prosecutor, who had gone pale, his mouth slightly agape. Damien's gaze never wavered. He knew the truth would come crashing down now. He just needed to keep the pressure on. "Your Honor," Damien said, his voice unwavering, "I request the dispatch call logs from the night of my arrest." You have to see the truth." He let the words linger, heavy with implication. "I wasn't the aggressor. They were." A murmur spread through the courtroom, the eyes of the onlookers wide. The officers, Drake and Malloy, shifted uneasily, their once confident postures collapsing into nervous tension. The room had become a battlefield, and Damien wasn't backing down. "Objection!" Mitchell barked, though his voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. "This is irrelevant. The defendant is not on trial here for his profession. His actions are what we're discussing." But Damien wasn't having it. "His actions are only part of the story. What you should be worried about are the actions of the officers. The lies they've fed you." Thornton slammed the gavel down hard, but the force felt hollow. She was trying to assert control, but the room had already been thrown into chaos. "I will review the request," she muttered, clearly rattled, before looking at Mitchell, as if seeking his support. But Mitchell was no longer the confident prosecutor he had been. His eyes darted between Damien and the officers, a flicker of realization slowly dawning. The courtroom was a living, breathing thing now. Each person there seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. And Damien? He could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders. This was it. The line had been drawn. His revelation wasn't just about his identity. It was about the truth he was about to expose. "I'm requesting," Damien repeated, "the dispatch logs, Your Honor. It's time for the officers to be held accountable." Thornton's eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Damien to fight like this. But she knew she couldn't ignore him now. Not when the whole room was watching. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "We'll have the logs pulled. Court is adjourned for the time being." The sound of her gavel echoed in the silence, but it was drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. They were restless now, sensing that something big was happening. Something that could tear the system wide open. The next few hours were a blur. Damien sat in the holding area, his hands uncuffed but still tight with tension. He could feel the walls closing in. He had thrown the first punch, but now he had to wait. The court was reviewing the dispatch call logs, and everything depended on what they found. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the screen lighting up with a message from Oscar Ramirez. "I've got something. Don't say anything until we get the full report. But this could change everything." Damien's heart skipped. He quickly typed a response. "What is it?" The reply came almost instantly. "We need to talk. Meet me outside. Now." Damien didn't hesitate. He got up, motioning to the guard at the door. "I need to speak with my attorney." The guard nodded, unlocking the door. Damien stepped out into the hallway, his mind racing. What had Ramirez found? Could this be the break they needed? Or was it just another dead end? Outside, the air was thick with anticipation. A small crowd had gathered, their eyes trained on the courthouse doors. Journalists, activists, and even a few curious bystanders were standing around, whispering to each other. They had heard the news. They knew what was happening inside. Damien spotted Ramirez standing near the corner, talking to a man Damien didn't recognize. As he approached, Ramirez looked up, his face grim. "Damien, this is Michael Dawes," Ramirez said, gesturing to the man beside him. "He's a reporter with the Chronicle. He has something you need to see." Michael Dawes stepped forward, his expression serious. He handed Damien a folder, thick with documents. "I've been digging into the officers' records," Dawes said quietly. "I didn't want to get involved at first, but after the courtroom, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Damien flipped the folder open, scanning the pages quickly. His pulse quickened as he saw what was there. Internal police records, complaints from multiple citizens, allegations of misconduct, and most damning of all, a report linking Officer Drake and Officer Malloy to a pattern of unlawful stops. Racial profiling, excessive force. "This is big," Damien said, barely able to contain his shock. "This is more than just a wrongful arrest. This is a systemic issue." Dawes nodded, his eyes steely. "I've already sent copies to the media. This is going public whether they like it or not." Damien felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about his case anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. "You need to get this information to the AG's office," Ramirez said. "It's the only way to make sure they don't bury it." But Damien wasn't listening. His mind was already racing, calculating his next move. This could be the smoking gun. The evidence he needed to bring the officers down, to bring the entire department down. "Thank you," Damien said to Dawes, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "I'll take it from here." Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. There was a new sense of urgency in the air. The judge had ordered a recess while the dispatch logs were being reviewed, but no one was focused on that anymore. The crowd outside had grown, the tension palpable. Everyone knew something was going to break, and everyone was waiting for it. Damien returned to the courtroom, his mind sharp, focused. Ramirez followed closely behind, but Damien didn't stop. He moved straight to the front, where Mitchell was sitting, his face drawn in a scowl. "You have something to say, Mr. Cross?" Mitchell sneered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I do," Damien said, his voice cold. "I just received some new information. You might want to sit down." Mitchell blinked, but Damien didn't give him a chance to respond. He turned to the judge, his gaze unwavering. "Your Honor, I'm requesting that we adjourn until the State Attorney General's office can conduct a full investigation into the officer's records. There's been a pattern of misconduct, one that goes far beyond what happened to me." The room erupted. Mitchell stood, his face turning red. "This is absurd. You're trying to derail the case with baseless accusations." Damien didn't flinch. He was past the point of backing down. "The truth doesn't care about your objections, Mr. Mitchell. The truth is what matters." Thornton slammed her gavel again, her eyes flicking between the two men. She was stuck. She had no choice but to listen. The evidence was mounting. She could feel the shift in the room, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Order," she barked, but it was too late. The momentum had already shifted. An hour later, the courtroom was buzzing with activity. The room had become a battlefield, but it was no longer just about Damien's case. It was about a system, a corrupt system, that had been exposed for the first time. The dispatch logs had arrived, and they told the truth. The officers had lied. They had fabricated the entire encounter. But as the truth seemed within reach, another bombshell dropped. The courtroom door opened with a bang. A new figure stepped inside, a tall man in a dark suit. He was unfamiliar to everyone in the room, but he carried himself with authority. A badge gleamed on his belt. He walked directly toward the judge's bench. "Who the hell is that?" Mitchell growled. "State Attorney General's office," the man said without missing a beat. "We've been monitoring the situation. I need to speak with Judge Thornton. Now." The room froze again. Thornton's eyes widened. She knew what this meant, and so did Damien. The game had changed once more. And then, with a final snap, everything went black.